let's explore part one of censorship and discrimination, etc. There are identity elements that are protected classes under the law. Some of them are protected under the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So I believe, going from memory, race is protected under the 64 Civil Rights Act. I believe nationality comes from the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and some others. There are others, like, for example, age. Age is a protected class on the basis of the Employment Discrimination Act of 1967. The exact origin of each category doesn't matter so much as the point that this is what the law currently says. Is that something you are in agreement with, or do you think those laws are problematic?
Civil rights protections?
Yes, on the basis of the categories I listed.
I don't want to be reductive, but I would say at first glance, absolutely civil rights, expanding them even. I think, like the Equality Act, for instance, important, but I often bring up the caveats that we have to be careful about, because we're trying to protect everyone's rights, and we have to make sure we don't overlap in certain areas, like overt Christians who believe that gay people shouldn't be married, claiming that's their right when it doesn't interfere with their lives. So that's not an argument.
No, it's not. But what I mean is, you believe that it should be that employers and businesses should not be able to discriminate against employees and customers on the basis of the religion, for example, or
absolutely.
their status as veterans or race or whatever.
Well, status as veterans, I don't know enough about.
Well, I was going to get into that. So I was going to ask you, are there any categories of protected class that you actually don't think should have protected status?
I don't know.
Okay. I mean, I have two that I'll bring up. There's two that for me are question marks, and I'll tell you why. Yeah. One is religion, and I go back and forth on it for the following reason. On the one hand, we have a country where freedom of and freedom from religion is a very important characteristic of how the country was established. So to say religious belief or lack of religious belief should not be protected, it seems problematic to me in some ways. On the other hand, religion is self-professed. Now, you can say, if you're born into a Catholic family, to choose not to be Catholic anymore is different than to be born agnostic and to choose to continue being agnostic. But religion is self-professed, and on that basis, I do have a question mark around whether religion should or shouldn't be a protected class. I don't have the answer.
I think it should be.
You think it should be?
And partly because it's long-standing from the foundation of the country, right? The idea of I don't know how far back it goes, but the idea that you could come here and be safe to believe what you believe and live. There is a challenge, though, because what's to say? I think someone actually did this. They tried claiming that Trumpism was a religion, and they believed Trump was the Messiah, and a judge told them no.
Well, that's a bit of a cartoonish thing, but you first said you think it should be because that's the way it's been for a long time. That's an argument just to continuing to do things because it's the way we've done them. I mean, black people used to be slaves too. Yeah.
Right. So the idea with religion is that we've created a society where we have numerous religions.
Right.
And we've created an umbrella over all of them saying you can't do these things, but you can participate in public if you believe something. And so for the longest time, we've had Christians who believe, biblical Stone Age ideas and contradictory ideas. The same is true for Islam, Judaism, and many, many other religions. I'm just calling out Abraham specifically because it's the easiest one to point to. Well, we need to live together. We can't go to Muslims and tell them you're not allowed to believe this anymore, but we can say the practice of doing X based on the Quran or the Bible is against the law. So we do restrict certain practices if it's a violation of the law.
Sure, yeah, but those are called crimes, and then it doesn't matter sort of why you're doing it. If something's a crime, it's a crime. I guess my question is, if you say I am part of the Pentecostal religion, that's a sort of self-professed choice, and to me, it's much closer to being someone who skateboards than it is to being someone who's Asian. So for me, religion as a sort of choice that people make is closer to other choices that people make, and it's not an immutable characteristic. So I think if there was a case to be made against protecting religion on that basis, it would be that it's just something people choose.
I don't entirely disagree. I think that's a really good point. I think my concern would be, would we remove the protection of religion, and then all of a sudden, bakeries and whatever start saying no to people, and businesses start restricting access to tax-paying Americans? So, but let me do this. Let me explain to you my rationale for why the baker in Colorado should bake the cake. Right?
Okay.
We all pay taxes. If you want to argue we shouldn't, that's a different argument. Right now we do. That means my money goes towards the roads, it goes towards the plumbing, it goes toward the collective defense. The building you have where you sell goods exists in a space I am contributing to. If you weren't there, someone else could be. It's not fair that I should lose access to a portion of my community because you don't like some immutable characteristic about me. Now, I think there's figuring out where the line is can be challenging. Behavior, most likely. If you go in and start shrieking at the top of your lungs, then maybe they should say you have to leave. You're disturbing people or you're breaking the law. But if someone comes in wearing, like an imam comes into a bakery, they should not be able to be like, I'm arbitrarily removing a member of the public who contributes to my collective defense, to my fire services, to my plumbing. No, that's not fair. That's, so we need social cohesion, and we might not like each other, but we have to respect and tolerate that we're all in this together. So
that's a bit of a different, I mean, in the only cap, so I basically agree with what you're saying. I mean, I don't think that's something that should happen. Religion as a protected class precludes the necessity of the argument you're making, though, doesn't it? Because it doesn't even matter whether we think that for social cohesion reasons it should or shouldn't be allowed, because religion's already a protected class.
Yeah. What do you?
I guess I thought you were going beyond that in a defense of why. How does this relate more specifically to the baker and the issue of sexual orientation?
It's a member of the public who's doing something that is legal and in no way impacts your business negatively. It's complicated, I'll admit. Things aren't necessarily black and white. There's nuance.
I mean, I guess the question about defining it that way is that there's nothing illegal about saying we don't serve people who wear MAGA hats. Political orientation is not a politically protected class.
In D.C. it is. In Washington, D.C. it is.
Okay, which is outside of Washington, D.C. It's not a protected class. Fashion, right. Assuming that it is not inextricably linked to religion, which is a protected class, which would be like the MAGA hat, right? That would be a fashion statement. That's not a protected class. So by your definition, you also wouldn't be able to ask someone to leave because of their political affiliation, which is legal currently outside of Washington, D.C. Is that something you would want to see changed?
Potentially. Really? But it is complicated. So I'll explain, if someone believes something awful and they're a taxpayer and they participate in public, I don't see what your argument is to remove someone arbitrarily from your business if they're not doing anything. Listen, I'll put it this way.
Well, the argument is private corporations are simply allowed by the law. You got to change the law if you don't want them to be able to do that.
They're allowed to kick anybody they want out?
Assuming they're not doing it on the basis of a protected class. Yeah, that's how it works.
Right.
Those signs that say we sort of reserve the right to refuse service to anybody, that's legally accurate, assuming it's not violating the protected class non-discrimination laws.
So this is actually a really, really important thing to break down, because I think we get to the line drawing portion of tribal arguments.
Exactly.
Because I think we both we agree that people should be protected, but figuring out where and how far. I'm not entirely in favor of protecting political classes like DC does.
Oh, you're not? I thought you just said you were.
So the core concept of letting a law-abiding, calm, decent person, like your average person, go about their business, I like the idea. But it is there has to be a line drawn somewhere, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I agree.
And right, so for me, I think the line is, well, I agree. I think religion should be protected, but political affiliation is where things start to get questionable to me.
Okay.
Outright. I'm not entirely against it. I'm interested in entertaining the concept. I maybe lean towards it, but it is challenging. And there's a lot of questions that I think need to be broken down to truly understand why or why not. And so ultimately, I'll put it this way, like this conversation is part of the process of figuring out where to draw the line.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's like right now it's not protected outside of DC. So if we want to go in the direction of saying any potential, I don't even know the right word to use, it's kind of difficult. I guess we're calling it a potential or actual customer or like patron of a business. One idea, which would be a significant move from where we are now that you suggested, is if the person's doing something legal, right? If they're just there trying to buy a cake, for example, or whatever the case may be, and it's a business that is open to the public. Obviously, there are exceptions of businesses that simply aren't open to the public, which are sort of handled differently. If the person's not breaking the law in some way, a business should not be allowed to turn them away. That would require some pretty significant and heavy-handed government intervention in private business, would it not?
Oh, probably, yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And is that philosophically, based on your self-described center-left politics, is that something you would be okay with?
You know, I think the challenge is having the conversation and trying to figure out what to do is different from being like, I would like to assert the government do X. You know, it's a challenge. Honestly, I don't have all the answers. What I do know is we face and I'm sorry if this is kind of like dodgy of the question, but you can re-ask me again. I'm just trying to get my thoughts out.
Yeah.
If we get to a point in society where we start restricting access to businesses, you know, things start to break down. I think even in terms of like international endeavors and international conflict, we want to have as many links to each other as possible. The more trade we have with other countries, the less likely we are to engage in conflict. At least that's my general understanding of a lot of, you know, history. So it's a challenge, right? If we said no religion could, you know, if we had no protected classes, you see this story. It was written about by Will Chamberlain. Lyndon Johnson would send 3 of his staffers to drive from DC to his home in Austin through the South, and they were all black. And when one day he said, "Will you take my dog with you?" And they explained to him that they drive for hours to try and find a bathroom because they won't be allowed to use these businesses. So that's when Lyndon Johnson was like, "Oh my God, this is a bad thing."
Yeah.
And I agree. And so the challenge is, how far do we go in trying to protect everybody? Can we go too far? And this is one of the debates, I think, with everything. It's particularly the Equality Act right now is why, you know, there's a lot of contention around that. Who is worthy of protection and who isn't? For me, I honestly don't know. My bigger issue, and again, I'll throw it back to you to re-ask anything you think I may have missed.
Yeah.
Is that social media platforms are monopolizing the commons in terms of commerce, financial transactions, and speech.
Okay, so let's get to so I want to go to social media next, but just to make sure I understand your position on this piece, you said you don't like the idea of telling businesses that they have to accept certain customers, or you're not in favor of changing the law to make it so that businesses have to accept certain customers if they don't want to. Did I read that correctly?
Well, let me try and clarify. I think civil rights law as it is today is fantastic.
Okay.
There's probably some redundancies and some hiccups. I don't know all the laws. I think we need to have a conversation around civil rights protections as it pertains to local and federal jurisdiction. I don't know if political affiliation should be protected, particularly because there's a lot of crazy people out there who believe crazy things who probably we shouldn't allow in certain circumstances. But you brought up a good point about religion, because religions also believe crazy things. So I admit it's a big challenge.
But at the business regulation standpoint, in terms of the government coming in and mandating,
I'm totally in favor of government coming and putting the boot down on all of these corporations that are destroying the environment, that are not paying a dime in taxes, that are putting their money overseas, that are generally disrupting things, and then pitting us all against each other. Like, I'm not going to go on a rant, but yes, absolute regulation.
And let me just, and we're going to move on to social media, but I want to be super sure I understand this. Obviously, multinationals who don't pay taxes, that's more of a regulatory issue when it comes to finances. But imagine the customer walking into a clothing store, and the customer, for whatever reason that is not related to a protected class, the store doesn't want to do business with them. Should the government say to the store, you have to, unless this person's doing something illegal, you have to accept them as a customer, or should the business be allowed to say, please leave, we don't want to serve you?
I think that's too absolute. There's too many factors. It's nuanced. I would say there's no yes or no answer to that question, right? Is the person screaming? Do we not know?
But that's the whole point. It's an act. They're not doing anything which is criminal, but they're also not being asked to leave on the basis of a protected class in which they are members. It's just the business doesn't want to do business with them. Should a private business have the right to say, we don't want to do business with you, or should the government force them to do business?
Now it depends on the scale, right? If it's small hole in the wall that sells hot dogs, and he says, you know what, no hot dog for you. Well, it's a small hot dog shop. If it's something like the electric company, then probably not, because you don't have any choices. And so when a company gets too big, it dominates. And so it's a really nuanced question.
Well,
right?
Yes and no. I mean, monopoly utilities, I would argue, are a bit different from what we're talking about here.
Let's say what's a good way to put it? There's only one cable company, right? Should Comcast, in the area where they own it, refuse internet service to certain people for no reason? I would say no.
Most of those companies would have I think that one is actually not really a very important question, because when Comcast comes in, typically, and I was involved in the negotiation of such a contract when I was on the board of a TV station, typically the contract that Comcast signs with the municipality says that they're not allowed to do that. So it actually would not really be an issue.
Sounds like the government regulating that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I am not a free market. I believe in a mixed economy. I think you need the government to come in and correct errors and stuff like that.
Okay.
So if we're notified of an error or something going wrong, I think the government, I think that's what the government should be doing, saying like kind of like a referee, this is what you can't be doing.
I agree there.
Yeah.